I'm not actually against people being put off using computers, meaning that this was in relation to the graphical user interface, that if we had an environment in the 80s and 90s where consumer computers weren't, say, viable for the general public, so let's say your family wouldn't buy a computer because it didn't have a graphical user environment. However, let's say the computers that were being released in the early 1980s were things like the Spectrum and whatever, that were all focused around the command line interface and programming and inputting data. And these were usually bought for, say, younger people, children, right? And almost, I think that is more desirable than having ubiquity or easily usable computers that the whole family, from mother, father, grandmother, child, young child, could use. I actually think that's a good thing. I have no problem with the majority of people not wanting to buy a computer because they feel that unless everything has some sort of graphical veneer or a mouse to do everything, I have no problem if not having those things stops them buying a computer. Meaning that if you buy a computer, there's a steep learning curve, and I'm completely okay with that. Meaning that if the majority of people don't buy a computer because of the steep learning curve, I'm okay with that. Meaning that if we don't have a world where everybody who could buy a computer, in a sense of they've got the money to buy a computer but don't because they feel they're too complicated for them, I'm actually okay with that. I'm okay with every single person on the planet not having a computer. For me, that I'm the complete opposite of this sort of utopia that has existed around consumer computing. I'm a lot happier that computers can computer development is slower, and that the attitude isn't, we need more elaborate frameworks, we need more elaborate graphical user environments, we need more shiny things to distract people to make their current computers obsolete and for them to buy a new computer, even though the computer they had is perfectly viable for the majority of computing. That's not to say I'm not about banning computers. I don't want to ban computers for people, if you see what I'm saying. But if people are put off by this learning curve, that's okay with me. I have no problem with that. So, and I was kind of accused of being elitist in this respect, and I guess technically I am. But what I'm trying to say is that the world got on pretty well and pretty fine where every single person didn't have a computer. And I think if we were in that same situation now, the world would possibly be even better. And if that's like being conceited because people like myself and people on this chat would still get a computer, well, that's perfectly fine. Nobody has to have a computer. Nobody has to, in the sense of, in that world, nobody has to have a computer. You don't just exist for a corporation to be some kind of consumer So you can have e-commerce shoved down you, advertising directly into your operating system, and subscriptions thrown at you at every single web page. That world, if it didn't exist, for most people, I don't know about you, is fine by me. But if you are somebody, let's say a normal person, who does have some money, and you want to put in a bit of effort to be able to use that computer, you're willing to go for a bit of a hazing period like people did in the early 80s, good, because that's how it should be. So in that way, chasing hardware, chasing the latest shiny piece of hardware, that means your convoluted desktop environment or your convoluted software needs 9 or 10 gigabytes to idle, is crazy to me. And again, it's just an excuse to consume for these companies. Is it really good for the user? And what I really don't want people to confuse is what's good for the consumer and what's good for the user aren't necessarily the same thing. Because the consumer is just always going to be the consumer. Okay, you can get on Facebook, you know, with the pre-installed desktop icon, or you can get onto, you know, Apple Pay, so you can use your Apple Pay, you know, instantly and link to your cloud after 2 seconds as some sort of feature for a consumer. I don't think that's necessarily a good thing for the user. I think it just says a lot about the state of computing. So for the consumer, if we had a situation where hardware wasn't as quote unquote powerful as it is now, and it was closer to what computers were, say 5, 10 plus years ago, or say 10 plus years ago, or even longer, and that, you know, there was a focus around the command line interface rather than the graphical interface, that's perfectly fine by me. And if that means that, you know, a lot of people are put off by it, well, it doesn't matter. Nobody has to have a computer. We shouldn't be in a world where you have to be a consumer, where you have to have yourself on the latest web browser, connected by the, you know, intravenously to Facebook, Meta, Amazon. And these things feel like cliches to say, but look at our actual world now, and just how do you actually feel about the web? Anytime you install even say Firefox, it preloads every commercial Amazon, eBay, Facebook website on its start page as default. Not having that, I don't think that's a bad thing.